And today we're going to be talking about searching for and approving volunteers on your volunteer portal. Your process might look a little different at your site, and that's okay. This is kind of just get you started and just talk a little bit about things and make sure you're familiar with the different tools and things that you have available to you, and just to make sure everybody's on the same page. I always say this at the beginning of all my webinars, since this is a webinar and we're not in a traditional classroom where we can see each other, we don't have kind of the same, I don't have the same visual cues that I'm used to where I can watch my audience and make sure you're following along. So you have permission to, use the chat feature and ask questions, unmute yourself, ask questions. It's okay, since otherwise I don't know if you're getting the information, I guess, if you're understanding what I have to say. I tend to talk a little fast, so I'm dependent on you guys to keep me on track if I waver. So with that, let's get started. I like to put things in more of a PowerPoint format. We can go to the site and play around a little, but technology can sometimes be our friend and our foe and be a little slow, so I sometimes find it's easier to put it in a PowerPoint, and then I'm more than happy to share my PowerPoint with you guys so you have that as a resource later to look back on. Okay, so let's get rolling. So searching and approving volunteers. Let's see, where's my little, come on, computer. There we go, okay. So there's multiple ways that you can search for and look at, the volunteers on your site. There's three main areas you go to on your site. And the first one is the search menu under the management tab. And then you can also go to the reports menu and the export information menu. Remember that only users with the role of HR admin or system manager are going to be able to actually go into the search menu and the reports menu, whereas users with the role of volunteer support are going to have access to that information or the export information menu. So just know that not everybody's going to see everything. It really is limited based on the roles you have within the system. I just recently rewrote the roles documentation for the volunteer portal, and I am going to be updating your sites with that, and hopefully that will help break down and explain the roles a little more clearly, and even it walks through how to pull reports so you know who has what roles and stuff. So maybe if you have time at the end of the presentation, you want to learn a little bit about that, I'm willing to stay on the line and kind of go over that to help you guys so you can, understand and manage roles a little bit. Okay, so those are the three areas that you can go on your site to look at your volunteers, really to kind of pull information about volunteer applicants on your site. The most common place that people tend to go to is volunteer search. And when you're in that screen, you really have a lot of options, when it comes to searching. We're kind of in our mind used to, searching for those complete volunteers that we process, but there's more ways than that to find volunteers. Very simple way is just to pick an interest type and then look them up by name. So I'm sure you guys all know that. You click on the letter of the first letter of the last name, and then you can start typing in the little increment filter box and find them by their name, or you can scroll. And then as you find people, add them to the, click on the name and it adds them to that box. And you can add as many people as you want, and then press search, and it's going to pull up the records of those people that you've selected. So that's one way to look for people on your portal. And the nice thing when you're in the search screen is you're not just, pulling them up, you're actually pulling up their record. You're going to be able to access all of their documents they've uploaded. So if they've uploaded a copy of their driver's license, if they've completed any addendums, all that detail information can be found under this menu. Okay, questions as I'm kind of rolling along. You can also search for volunteers by date ranges. If you choose to include the submission portion of the checklist, I only have 2 or 3 sites that actually have volunteers do the electronic signature piece so they can get a submit date. Then you have that ability to enter a submit date as a filter. You can look for applicants by the last date they visited your site. So if you're curious, like who came in within this time frame, you can do a from or a to, or you can just do a to. You don't have to do both ends of the date range. You can pick one or the other. And then status. So the status date works with the status filter. So you pick a status, so you're gonna say like complete, and then you're gonna pick a date range. So it's gonna work in tandem to find, I wanna see everybody who was complete by this time frame. Hope that makes sense. We give you even more options to help you narrow and really kind of hone in and find specific information when you need to. There's the status filter, which hopefully you guys are all using that because that's how we train people to process their volunteers. Not a lot of you have started to archive volunteers yet, but over time we encourage you to archive old, inactive users, people that just maybe volunteered in the past but haven't come back in a few years. We would archive them, but you may want to look at their information. So we give you the option to check that box. It's right up here. You would check in it when you do your search, and it would pull up those records as well. So they could be included in your search results. You've got the option to find people with hits and holds. So people on hold are people that either answered a question on the disclosure that placed them on hold, or if you use the electronic submission signature portion and they disagreed to that process, they are put on hold. Or the third reason someone might be on hold is because the district chose to manually put them on hold. And when someone's on hold, they aren't visible to lesser users on reports and things. So if someone's on hold, even if you cleared them to be a volunteer, they're not going to show up on those export reports if they have a hold. So remember that. So even when you're processing volunteers, and if someone has a disclosure hit, when you're processing, you should be looking at that disclosure hit kind of at the same time. And if you're going to approve them to be a volunteer, you're going to also want to clear that hit at the same time so that they show up on those reports. And that might be confusing, and we'll talk about that a little bit more when we go, when we get to the portion of the presentation where we talk about approving volunteers. But if you want me to talk about it now, just let me know. Some of you choose to add the role of employee to your employees that have accounts so that you can flag them and mark them so you know that they're employees as well. So you have the ability to go and look for volunteers. Say, I just want to see who are my employees, so you could check this box to include the employees in your search. We also give you the option to exclude people. So if you want to not see anybody who hasn't been cleared, or if you want to not include your employees in a list, you have boxes where you can check that to exclude them from the results of a search. And lastly, in this little section of the search screen, we give you the ability to look for people by their AKA last name field. So when people change their name, you might remember someone and say, I know them, their name was Fisher, but I don't know what their new last name is, and they probably updated their profile in hopes that they actually filled out their, they actually put their old name in on their profile. Sometimes that can be a helpful tool by going in and typing in that old last name and filtering and finding them that way. So hopefully those different filtering tools make sense to you. If not, let me know, and you can go to the site and I can show you guys in a little more detail how they work. I know that these don't always get used very often, but I like to point out that they're available because sometimes some of you have really large volunteer pools, and having the ability to kind of filter and find people a little more easily can be helpful. Okay. There's even more, but wait, there's more. So like an infomercial. We use traits and events to mark our volunteers. We add traits as we are approving people, and so that we know, when we give someone that trait of approved, it adds them to the appropriate export so that they show up for our volunteer support people to know that they've actually been approved. So we give the ability to search for those people. Same with events. When we clear people and we add the event so we know what type of volunteer they are, and we can set their expiration date. So we also give you the ability to look for people based on those different events. But my favorite thing is we also give you the ability to find people that you haven't yet given an event or trait to. And we teach you how to do that for when you're processing volunteers. So if you're going to set your search for complete volunteers, and you're going to look for everybody who's missing maybe the trait of approved, then you're going to get a list of everybody who's complete, but you haven't gone through and looked at them yet, maybe, and haven't processed them yet. So you'll know who you're still working on. So you give the ability to search for people by trait or people that are missing a trait. So hopefully that all makes sense as well. All right. So here's what the screen looks like if you kind of zoom out. Since I did little screenshots and kind of zoomed in to focus on the different things. So, you always pick an interest type if you're wanting to look at a specific volunteer, if you use more than one, if you have more than one volunteer type, or you have the option to press any, which will include all. Like I said, you can search by name, and then the different date options, submit date if you use that electronic signature piece on your checklist. Date, visit, status, and then we talked about archive and all those things. If you want to exclude information, limit information, traits, and missing information. Sorry. Questions about just kind of searching. And so you guys all know after you've kind of picked what you want to search for and you press the search button, then your results are going to be listed below like this, and you get this nice screen of information. And I just like to go over kind of what's down below. This column obviously is the ID number, and that ID number is that unique identification number that's used throughout the system. If you go and look at any of the database tables, you're not going to typically see the volunteer's name. You see the user ID number. The nice thing about that is ID numbers never change. People change their names, but the ID number's fixed. It's going to stay there forever. And that's it. And it's a short, easy way to store data in a table, and it can connect easily. You're going to see the volunteer's name, the status. If you use that electronic signature, there will be a submission date here. If you don't, it'll be blank. Some people used to use it and they don't, so that's why some people have one and some people don't, because we kind of cleaned that up we took it away on a lot of sites to try to make the process quicker and easier for volunteers. We wanted to limit the amount of steps they had to do and make the experience easier on them. Where other districts really liked having that submit date, because for various reasons, I have some districts, it was to help them kind of monitor who they like to clear applicants in the order that they submit their application, so to speak, so they can filter real quickly by the oldest and work that way so that nobody kind of gets overlooked, so to speak. Last visit, so that was the last time that user logged into their account. I also like to word of caution, if you shadow an account, that last visit is going to change to the date you shadowed. So just know that. So it's usually accurate unless you're shadowing them. That could actually be the date that you actually shadowed them instead of their actual last visit date. If they have a hit or hold, that's what these next 4 columns refer to. So anybody with a hold on their account would have a red circle in this field and hit. And we talked about that specifically with the disclosure. When districts set up their disclosure, they identify any questions that if a volunteer applicant answers in a specific manner would signify a hit, and it would trigger a hit on their application. So it would mark that it would flag that question as a hit, and it would mark their application on hold. It would also put a hit on their application and kind of put them, they'd be stuck, so to speak. And then as you are processing and clearing your volunteers, you would also look at that disclosure information. You'd want to clear that as well. On this particular applicant up here, this person had a hit, but we decided to clear them, so they have the green all clear and good to go symbol. And then on this person down here, Mr. Evans, when we were processing them, we decided that their particular hit would bar them from volunteering, so we decided to not clear them. So we got the yellow caution, like proceed with caution, no thank you. So that's what that symbol stands for. So we're going to pass kind of idea. You'll also see there's a column here with a little person emblem, icon, whatever, and that's how we quickly identify, if you're using that employee role, who our employees are. I know I'm talking fast. Questions about that hit hold columns. Most of you guys should know, hopefully, what they mean at least. As we move over, the summary. This is basically a summary of all the information that we gather in the profile section and some of the checklist section of the volunteer. And it's put into a little kind of one-page report. Sometimes it's longer depending on the amount of information. And we use that information when we actually get to the clearing and processing of our volunteers. And we're going to talk about that a little more in detail in a few minutes. And then the next column is the documents column. So if you click on that icon, it's going to open a screen, and it's going to show you any documents that that particular volunteer applicant has uploaded to their application, or it could also be anything that the management side, HR side, has added to their application as well, and or any addendum. That's where they all live. So driver's license, passport, identification, CPR card, or addendum information. It's all going to live under that document folder. And that's also where you're going to go when it comes time to do the background check and look them up, like in watch. And we're going to talk about that as well in just a minute. For users that do have a disclosure hit and you want to review what that hit, what triggered that hit, the next column here, this little PDF, is their actual disclosure statement. So if you click that, it's going to open a PDF report. It's going to show your disclosure, your district's disclosure and the answers that they submitted. And you'll scan that, you'll find the question that triggered the hit. I often like to, I use Adobe, highlight the question the hit question with a highlighter. I do everything electronically, that's just me. And then I can save a digital copy with it highlighted so I know which question. So then I have that backup copy and I keep a copy of that. And we suggest that you keep copies of those actual, don't just depend on keeping them on the site, but actually open and save a digital copy of any of those disclosure hits for a good 5 years. Because what can happen is an applicant can come in and they can change their answers and save over what they've done. So sometimes it's nice to keep a copy of that, and you could very easily keep a digital copy and upload it from the management side of things, make maybe an other section under the uploads and keep it to the under the uploads, and the applicant won't have access to it, but it could live there. Actually, you wouldn't want to do that. Sorry, let me rephrase that. Well, on volunteer you can. You wouldn't do that in jobs because you don't want hiring managers to see it, but in volunteer, typically you don't have anybody but HR people looking at the actual documents because we have licenses and stuff, so that would be totally appropriate if you felt like you needed to keep a copy of that. Because we've had some instances I've dealt with just this year where people like, this person had a hit. I know they did. It's gone. I can't remember what they did. So something to think about. And we'll talk about it a little more when we get to that disclosure hit section in a few minutes. And then we've got the option if you want to print an envelope. And then lastly, the ability to directly email that applicant, volunteer applicant from the system. So that's the screen. Any questions about the search screen? You can always press the list button up here, and it's going to take your results and make you a nice little PDF list of everybody. I think puts name and I can't remember what all's on it, like the applicant email list or something like that. It might have their email and their name and ID number and stuff. I always forget what's on there. And when you're done, you can choose to, clear your search or clear your results and do another search if you want to keep going, or go to somewhere else in the system. Okay, reports. The reports menu looks exactly like the search menu, and it has all the same features. You know, you can look for people in the same variations and find them exactly the same. The big difference is you don't have the ability to pull open like the specific documents or whatnot. You're just going to get your list in a report format, like a little PDF. Instead of showing at the bottom of the screen, you're going to get a little PDF report. That's the big difference between looking people up in applicant or volunteer search versus volunteer reports. So that's kind of the difference. Questions? And the third area in the system to search and find volunteers is under the export information menu. And like I said, this menu is also available to users with the role of volunteer support. However, they don't see everything under this menu like an HR admin user would see. They're going to see just the reports that we've given them clearance to see. So, because this snippet is from a view from an HR admin, you're seeing all these things like user roles and stuff like that. They don't see that. They typically see the approved to volunteer list, the denied list, and the pending list maybe, and the volunteer list, but they don't see any of the other reports. But this is where we train, our building support people, where they go to pull lists of who's been approved, who might be in the process of being approved, that pending approval list, so who's submitted an application but maybe hasn't gotten cleared yet, or who did not get cleared and is not getting cleared, so that denied list. And we teach them how to pull and open that list, how to sort it and find people. The nice thing about export information is that you can export it out. It can be filtered. It's like working in Excel, and a lot of people are really comfortable working with Excel, so it makes it kind of nice and familiar. When you're here, you can type in this view name box to filter the list down and find your report. If you have multiple pages, that can be really handy, especially as someone who has a system manager role or the HR admin role. If you have a big long list and you know the name of your list, it can be helpful to filter it down first to find the exact report. And once you find the report you want to look at, you always click on the magnifying glass to open it, and it's going to open in an additional window. So if nothing happens, check the pop-up blockers. And it'll look something like this. Kind of, you know, you'll have your data kind of laid out like with columns and rows, just like an Excel spreadsheet. And you have the ability to filter any of the columns. And every site's going to look a little different. We work with each site to decide what information you want on your reports. So some of them are really detailed and some of them are very simple. And like I say on almost every webinar, reports can be modified and customized to the client, you know, per client's request. You know, there are fees related to customization. They can be very minimal if it's something small, or they can be expansive if you have some grandiose idea. It's really up to the client, and we work with you on that to kind of create what's going to be most useful for you to do your job and to make your job easy on you and your users. You can type in any of these columns to filter, and then you know, you can export it out. The thing I like to point out, when you're in export information, you can change your filtering options to help you with your sorting data. And this is true with any of the portals, which I like. You can go and you right-click on the little funnel, and it opens a menu, and you can change this. So rather than equals, you could maybe say is greater than, or greater than and equal to, or begins with, or contains, or doesn't equal, to help you create the right type of filter. With the date, I like to change it to like is greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, so I can do a range rather than a specific date. So I want everything from November 30th, 2013 and beyond. And I would put is greater than or equal to, and then I would put my date. And it would just give me that information based on that filter change. Hope that makes sense. And then, you know, I go in, I can filter my data, and then I would export it. I would press the Export to Excel button. It would dump all that data into a nice into Excel, where I could keep on filtering and adjusting to my heart's content if I wanted to. So that's the third area that we get our volunteer information, where we access the data, where we search for our volunteers. So we do it under the search menu, we find it under the reports menu, we find it under export information. Okay. So approving volunteers. I like to think of it as a 4-part process. So we have to search for them first. That's why we talked about searching just a second ago. And then we have to check their information. We have to do a background check. That's the third step. Typically in Washington, it's through Watch. And then the fourth step is to clear them or not clear them within the system. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And it doesn't take much time. It's actually probably one of the easiest things we do. So using the volunteer search tool or the volunteer search menu, you're going to generate your list of volunteer applicants that need to be looked at, that are in that pending kind of, they're awaiting approval. So like we talked about searching, you're going to go in first and you're going to select your interest type or any, so you can include them all, depending on, your process. And then you're going to select the status of complete, because we want to look at our volunteers that have submitted all the information we need to look at in order to actually clear them. And we want to select that missing trait of approved, because we don't want to look at the people we've already approved. We just want to look at the people that have done all those steps, but we haven't had the time to approve them yet. And we press the search button, and we get that list of everybody who's not yet been approved but are complete and they're ready for review. That's the first step. That's searching for the volunteers. And that's what the screen looks like. So I go in, I select my interest type, I set my status to complete, I set my missing trait, and I press search. Okay, and then here's my list of volunteers that I need to work on. And when I am checking information, I typically look at the summary, because I get all that information I need to know. I've got my address, I've got my birth date, my name, and then I go to documents so I can look at their driver's license. Okay. And I do this on 2 screens because on my second screen, I'm going to have Watch open. So here's my summary report, and I've got my information. I've got my name, I've got the person's address, phone number, birthday. It's all here on this screen. You know, districts perform a background check on their volunteers to determine who can be approved or not to. In Washington State, most districts use Watch, the Washington Access to Criminal History, for the background check. You know, right now, we're not able to connect to Watch. You know, our hope is that someday we will. We're working on that. So it can all be completely integrated. But for time being, this is the process. And it doesn't take a whole lot of time for each volunteer. So once you look them up, you know, you pull up their information in the system, you look them up and Watch, and you can make a determination. Are we going to approve this volunteer or not? All right? And so I have to decide, am I going to approve them or not? So then I'm going to look at that particular volunteer. So I've got my list of volunteers on my screen. I'm going to click the pencil so I actually can open that particular volunteer's record. And when I click that volunteer, I click the pencil, I go and I click the Traits and Events tab. And the screen looks like this. So this is the process to clear the volunteer in the system. I start by adding a new event. And I'm going to give this person the event of approved volunteer. And I set their expiration date. That expiration date is really important. That's how we know when we're rolling to the new year, who to notify, who gets, who's expiring. It's how we identify, you know, every district process at the end of the year is different. Some districts like to reassign new tasks for volunteers if they're going to renew and come back the next year. Like maybe they want them to do a new orientation presentation. Some people want them to reread board policies. Some people, they assign different tasks, whatever it may be. And so if we need the date to find those volunteers, and that's how we quickly identify it. So you have to be consistent and use a consistent end date. You know, you'll make them all the same. You can't just pick and choose and randomly do it. Otherwise, we might miss somebody. So that's what we talk about that when we're training you. And I'm trying to think, Deb, I know I saw you join. If I miss anything important when it comes to this date, pipe on in, because this is a good time to add to this. And that date also is really, really important. If you're we have districts that have a 2-year expiration window. So like they approve volunteers for 2 years. So you have multiple years running at one time. You know, we need to be able to identify which year people belong to. So that expiration date's really, really important. If you have everybody expiring annually, it's a little easier to find people. But when you don't, that date is really what we look for. So that's why we teach you to set the expiration date. And then you would save your event. If you're approving people for different volunteer activities, they can have more than one event, and that's totally okay. Maybe you have classroom volunteer as one event type, and maybe you have coach volunteer as another event type. That's okay. And you would just add the second event. It takes just a few seconds to add an event. And then the second step is to add the trait. And you would just from the drop-down menu select the trait, either approved or denied, and you just select it and it adds, there's no saving. It just looks like this. So this is an example of someone who is approved. If you make a mistake, you don't want them to be approved, you just click on this trait underneath trait and it removes it. It's as simple as that. And then you could, from the drop-down, pick a different trait if you needed. When you're adding the event, there is that field for event data. So if you needed to add a note, there is space to add a note. You can do that as well. You You also have the option when you're adding an event to choose to have the system do the automatic email notification. So if you're approving someone, you can then have the system send out the approval email with the instructions. That's all set up in the background, and you have the ability to change that email at any time. And you can choose which events have automatic emails and which ones don't. And we work with clients to determine which events need automatic notifications and which ones do not. So if you want to learn more about that, or if you need help modifying messages, let either Deb or myself know, and we can walk you through how to modify, where to go in the system to do that. And so you understand what controls what. We're happy to do that. While we're here on this screen, I just like to point out the trait. Adding that approved trait, whether it's called volunteer approved, approved volunteer, everybody calls it something slightly different. We let the client choose. The trait is what determines which export information this user shows up on. That's kind of what drives if they show up on the approved list or not. So that's why it's really important. And then the event also kind of determines some other information too. So you've got to put them both in there. You can't just put one or the other. They both serve a purpose in a role in the system for how they display for your, especially for your volunteer support people, so your buildings can find who the volunteers are. I hope that makes sense. If not, say, hey, wait, please explain, and I'll do my best to explain. So that is, let me go back. That is, that's how you clear someone, really. You look them up in the search, you check their information, you pull them up and watch, and you make a determination, and then you clear them by adding an event and a trait, or you choose not to clear them and add the appropriate event and trait, because we have also an event that says volunteer not approved, trait not approved, and you're done. That leads into disclosure hits. I like to do the disclosure hits at the same time I'm processing, because I'm already looking at the information. But I know other districts kind of do things their own way. And I'd be more than happy for people to share their processes if they want to unmute themselves and talk about it. But if I'm already in the system, I'm already pulling somebody up, I've got their summary and their documents up, I'm going to look them up at Watch. It doesn't take me much longer to open that discovery at the same time, or disclosure at the same time, and make that determination. I just have a couple extra steps to add in at the same time. But let's just talk about disclosure hits. We did a little earlier, so you can have a hit on your record. This is if you use the job system. This mirrors the job system. When someone comes and creates an account, they go through a disclosure. Part of the profile, they complete a disclosure, so they're disclosing things about themselves. So, if they've committed any crimes or whatnot. And the volunteer disclosure is a very pared down version of what we ask job applicants. But some of those questions, if they answer in a certain way, trigger a hit, and they flag the applicant. And we train our job system people to daily come in and search for people with disclosure hits, because it blocks them from view from hiring managers. They don't show up for hiring managers if they have a hit until they've been cleared. And you can specifically come in and search for just people with hits. You start by clicking on the interest type any, you check the box hit, and you search. And you're going to go to the list for everybody who has a hit. Some do hit and hold, and up to you. And you get your list. It's going to look something like this. And then you're going to go through and you're going to process all of them. You're going to open that PDF document and read their disclosure report. And you're going to review the information and make a determination whether or not you're going to clear that hit, that applicant or not. And once you've decided clear or not clear, you're going to record your steps. I'm a big proponent of leaving a documentation trail. So everybody kind of knows what's going on. I like to paint a picture with words, so to speak. And you go to that same Traits and Events tab, and you add an event. We've got multiple events where you can choose from. You can put here, volunteer disclosure cleared, and you would put the date you cleared them. So this is a little different than that expiration date. And then if you wanted data, this is a great place to leave a little note, cleared per HR director. The other thing, though, that I say you want to do is you're going to check that hide box. And why do we do that? Well, if you're at all familiar with the volunteer system, events are all listed on the volunteers view under the checklist, so they see their events, because we want them to know when they're approved and when they expire, but you might not want them to see this whole disclosure information. So if we check hide, that prevents that event from being published on their view under on their checklist tab. So that's real important to check that box. Hope that makes sense. Okay. So here we have a little note, this person had a hit, we decided to clear them. We added the event, we're going to check hide so it doesn't show up for them to see. The last step is then we go to the profile tab. So let me go back here. So here's the profile tab right here. I go to that profile tab, and in the middle section of the profile tab, it's pretty big. It doesn't fit really pretty on the screen, so I just honed into it. We want to update some of these checks. And since we chose to clear this person, I'm going to check the hit cleared box. And when I do that, it's going to remove the hold on their account. They're still going to have disclosure hit. That doesn't go away, but they're no longer on hold. Remember when I said you get the green clear symbol added to their account, clear, they're good to go? It's going to remove the red hold, and it's going to add the green clear. You press save, and voila, they're good to go. All right. While we're on the discussion of disclosure hits, this is just an optional process that a lot of people, I like to point out, that some people like to do. When you're dealing with hits and holds and things, sometimes you just need more information because you just really, it's not clear. The applicant said yes on something, but they didn't provide you any information, so you don't really know much. It's totally appropriate to email that volunteer and ask for a little more information. And some people will have pre-canned email messages to kind of help them along the way. And so, you always have the option to press a little email envelope, the little yellow envelope to send an email out to that applicant, and the nice thing is it'll email the applicant and it'll log it into the email log. And then I like to document that I emailed that applicant. So I like to go to the comments tab and just make a little note that I sent them an email asking for more information about their hit. And, if they don't respond, I might leave them on hold forever. But if they do, then I can use that information, and that can help me determine, if I'm going to clear them or not. So that's just something I like to throw out there. You don't have to do that, but it's just, something to know. That comments tab can be helpful to you. And you also have the option with that, hide information on the comments tab as well. Okay. Are there any questions about searching and approving volunteers? Or anything else that's not really even about this that you might have questions about? Since you've got Deb and I on the line, we're willing to stick around, and we can go to an actual live site and show you things. I also said I'm willing to stick around and talk about other stuff as well. So that was my presentation on searching and approving volunteers.